You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your furry friend host, Abraham.
And I'm your pet pamperer host, Shane.
We're a psychology podcast. We talk about the human things that behaviors do. And we're going to today tackle something that is, I feel like, historically had a reason we could look back and say, that's definitely why we did this. And today you might find yourself asking, why do we still do this thing? And that thing is having pets.
You know, we're going to probably talk about some very specific pets and the exotic pets that do exist and all that fun stuff. But I you know, it's funny to think about this as I never thought to ask why I personally had pets, but I've had pets my entire life.
Wow.
For as long as I can remember from the time, I mean, from my first, I've had pets my entire life and they've always been dogs. But there was one time I had a lizard.
Okay. I've also had a lizard. Oh. All right, that actually brings me to a good point. So I assume then that you have a pet now?
I have two pets. So historically, I've had dogs, and like I mentioned, I didn't have a lizard. I had a bearded dragon, which I guess is a kind of lizard, but sounds cooler when you call it a bearded dragon. But right now, I have two pets. I've got an old Boston Terrier pug, and her name is Danger. She looks like a Boston Terrier with a tail. She's a very strange looking dog.
Nice.
And then I have a wiener dog named Frankie. Fun note on this: my brother tried to talk me into naming the wiener dog and Frank, and I was not willing to do that for many reasons, but. Sure. I mean, obviously, but the big thing that kind of stuck out in my mind was if Frankie ran down the road, I would have had to scream after her, "Come back in, Frank!" And I don't know that would have gone well in any neighborhood.
Well, you are in Florida, so I imagine it would have gone over fine.
Yeah,
I kind of wonder, do you feel like I should stop taking pot shots in Florida? I only lived there for 2 years, and maybe I should leave it up to you to take the pot shots.
No, you can take as many pot shots as you want. DeSantis just sent so many people away. So, like, you know, take as many as you would like.
That's a good point.
You and I will stand in solidarity about the pot shots about Florida. I love the state. Right, I love the people of the state that are not the governor.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that all makes a lot of sense. So I think I'll get on board with that, is say, once you guys get a better governor and like a better system in general going on there, I will step back and let you be the one taking pot shots. And until that happens, and until the governor stops doing like just the most evil thing you can think of, I'm going to take pot shots.
Yeah, no, do your thing. Actually, you know, it's funny that you bring that up because last night I was at a concert and one of the bands said specifically, they actually talked about politics and they were like, you know, it's really important to remember that like a place, people don't always represent a place, right? So like they were talking about how Florida just is always kind of the butt of the jokes, but the people at the show were really great. So that was kind of a nice little thing about that. Yeah, I thought that was a cool little thing. I was like, yeah, you're right. Floridians aren't all bad.
That's exactly right. All right. Well, before we get into all of the topics with respect to pets, not Florida, but with respect to pets and why we have them, is some things that you should know is that if you like the show and you'd like to support us, you can leave us a rating and review, subscribe, join us on Patreon, buy some merch, send us a donation, move in next door and do our lawns for us, whatever makes you happy and is the easiest for you to accomplish. Yeah. But I'll talk more about that at the end of the episode. And the other thing is that this episode comes out on September 28th. And I really did not time correctly when we were going to talk about all of the things to celebrate in September, that really the last couple episodes, like 2 episodes ago, I should have brought up the fact that this was Hispanic Heritage Month, started on September 15th. So I apologize that I'm so late to this, but there's still a couple weeks left. So celebrate Spanish Heritage Month. That goes from September 15th to October 15th.
Yes.
And I'm sorry that I'm late on that.
It happens, but we're here now.
The other things to celebrate for this month is that it is National Sewing Month, National Preparedness Month. So whatever that might mean to you, that might be preparing for a national disaster. It might be preparing for a test. And it is also National Library Card Sign Up Month. A lot of book themes in September, I've noticed. So,
yeah. I wonder if that's like that coincides with like the start of school.
I was actually at a similar thought. I think you're probably correct about that.
Yeah.
There's 3 more for the month. It is Pulmonary Fibrosis Awareness Month, Shake Month, shake like milkshake, and Hunger Action Month. So get those shakes to hungry people who have pulmonary fibrosis and get a library card, I guess.
You reward yourself with a library card.
That's right. Reward yourself with a library card. But that actually misses the fact that it is, as I mentioned, September 28th, and the day itself has some specific celebrations, which it is National Good Neighbor Day. So go be a good neighbor.
Ooh.
International Pokey Day. So if you're into poke bowls and that sort of thing.
The rules.
And man, we have some really good food holidays. It is National Strawberry Cream Pie Day. Important to know.
I don't know if I've ever had a strawberry cream pie.
I don't think I have either, but it sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds delicious. I wonder if there's like a vegan place that does that well.
There's got to be. I feel like they've basically gotten their hands on everything at this point. So
I imagine there's probably some good vegan recipes now that oat milk exists.
Exactly. Oat milk solved all things.
Yeah.
The last one is World Rabies Day.
Oh.
Interesting trivia fact, if you're going to like trivia night, the deadliest disease in the world in terms of its mortality is rabies. Once you have symptoms of rabies, it's basically 100% fatal. So it is a terrible disease. Get vaccinated or it will kill you.
Yes. Also, possibly where we think vampires came from.
That is true. Go back and see our vampire episode. Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, next week and for the next few weeks, we're going to be releasing our Halloween themed episodes. And we have some really fun ones lined up this year. I'm very excited to share those with everybody. So join us for the month of October if you're into some Halloween psychology topics.
Yes, it's going to be the raddest. I'm so excited about it.
All right. Well, we've spent a lot of time talking around things that do not have to do with pets. So let's get back on track. And the things I think to know going into this episode is, I guess, sort of the premise for this, as I mentioned, is sort of thinking, why do we have these pets, right? Why do we keep having them? And probably people who are listening to this, almost all of you are like, I have a pet, and how dare you even ask me my rationale and motivation for having that pet? And that's fair. I get that. But I want to dig into just, what's going on there. I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I'm just wondering why we do what we do with our pets.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a fair question. And so it's one of those things that's a tradition that's passed down that we kind of ask, well, where did this start and why do we continue to do it? Like, what was the original benefit and why do we do it today?
Yeah, so we'll ask when do we start having pets? Why do we keep pets? And what kind of pets do we keep when we keep those pets?
Yes. So let's go ahead and start with what a pet is. So a pet is, or pets are, I should say, the way that our script is reading, any domesticated or tamed animal that is kept as a companion and cared for affectionately. End quote. So that's the premise that we're going to start with here.
So if it is kept as a companion but not cared for affectionately, is not a pet?
No, by this definition, no, it's not.
Okay. Under those circumstances, it's like an elderly relative, I guess. Just kidding.
Yeah.
I think
great grandma's a pet.
If people are kind enough to have their elderly relatives living with them, then they're probably not treating them as if they're pets or anything. Of course, there is pet as a verb, which is to pet something. It means to apparently to fondle or caress. I think to affectionately, gently apply physical contact in a non-sexual way maybe is a way just to clarify what that means.
This is a note from Patrick. Patrick is the one that wrote the notes for these, so we want to just clarify. And this is a direct quote from him. Not sure I can say this, but I have not and will not fondle my pet. Not sure you want to say that either. So that's fair. Thanks, Patrick. Maybe don't fondle your pets.
Okay. So I like there's a quote here that he also found from Mark Schell in 1986. He says the pet, quote, is one essentially inedible animal, end quote. I mean, there's multiple inedible animals, I suppose, but I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. You simply define it that way.
So at this point in time, just as like a general thing to think about the number of pets that exist, there are 78 million dogs, 85 million cats, 14 million birds, 12 million small mammals, and 9 million reptiles estimated that are being held as pets right now. Not actually literally held, but that's kind of where we're at is the number of pets that exist. I'm imagining that's probably the United States.
That's probably a good guess on that one, because I feel like that's not that many. If you think about how many people there are, like just in the United States, let alone the whole world, that seems like a very low number. So I feel like there's probably probably more. Another thing that you might think about with pets and just understanding how they impact our general lives is how much of our hard-earned money we spend on them. We go to work 40, 50 hours a week, whatever it is or more, probably in the United States, and bring home all that money that we use to pay our rent and buy our groceries. And then we also have to pay our vet bills and buy our cats and dogs food and reptiles and whatever food we're buying and all that sort of thing. So according to the data we were able to gather here in 2021, people spent $123.6 billion on their pets. And so in the billions of dollars, there were 50 billion on food and treats, 29 billion, almost 30 billion, because 29.8 billion on supplies and medication, 43.3 billion on veterinary care, and 9.5 billion on other things related to their pets, such as grooming, pet sitting, and training. So there is money to be made.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. PetSmart's really rolling in it.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that was not factored into this, as far as I'm aware, is celebrity pets. They obviously spend more, so they might be shifting the average a little bit here. But think about so this is what we're spending on our pets. How much are our pets worth to us? A lot, apparently. We're talking in the billions. We're talking about it being spread across millions and millions of people. The other thing is, how much do our pets mean to us if we have to save their lives? And there were a few studies I'm not going to dig into, but thinking about recently, I think it was Lady Gaga whose dogs were kidnapped and then ransomed, and she paid, it was a lot. It was so just doing a quick search, she spent apparently $500,000 to return of her dogs. No questions asked. Just give them back. Here's half a $1,000,000 to give my dogs back. So they were worth a lot to her. Not everybody can. So they're $250,000 each. Not everyone can do that amount of money. There have been a couple of court cases where police officers killed people's pets, mostly because they startled them. They heard a barking dog and they shot at them. That also happens, I guess. Yeah. And people who went to court over that were awarded as much as $1.26 million in damages and the death of their dog. The majority of that actually came to emotional distress for the amount that was awarded just for that. There was another one that was $202,000 awarded to somebody whose pet was killed by a police officer as well. So there's just a lot of ways that money exists in this pet world, if you will.
Yes, it's a business. It's a lucrative business, whether you're a breeder or you're suing people over emotional distress or you're a groomer or whatever it is. There's a lot of money to be made in the pet world. It's a very specific industry and a pretty unique economy, it seems like.
Yeah. So why do those economies exist? Because there is money to be made. But that doesn't necessarily tell us why we'd be willing to spend so much on our pets. So let's start to dig into that. And I think it's helpful to understand that by first start digging into the history and sort of where that comes from. But first, ads. Okay, so we were just talking about how much we spend on our pets, and then we made some money to spend on our pets by playing some ads for you. And so now let's turn to the history of pets as far as we understand it.
Yeah, so according to Patrick, it's a bit of a cluster to determine, and we'll just leave it at that, a cluster.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a cluster to determine when it started, where, and with what animal, but we have some ideas. First, dogs appear to be the first animal that ended up being domesticated by humans. And this likely stems from human and gray wolf interactions. And if you're interested about gray wolves, go listen to our interview with Andrew Bulla about that, because that was a cool discussion.
Yeah, fun one.
But essentially, wolves lived near humans. And they were eating carcasses left behind and kind of hung around campfires. And it made sense to kind of work with them and as part of that ecosystem that they were living in.
And I've heard some anthropologists and other researchers disputing maybe that wasn't exactly how that got started, but at least it's a reasonable hypothesis for which there's some amount of data to suggest is accurate. So I think it's worth saying that at least could have been it or part of it as part of the domestication process.
Yeah.
As far as when this took place, humans actually haven't been around all that long. I think most estimates put us sort of 100,000 years-ish ballpark is about where we're at.
Yeah.
At least in our current forms, maybe a little bit longer than that, I think. But I think that's about where we're at. So domestication, they think, occurred somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 years ago, which is still a pretty good chunk That's a lot of our history.
Yeah.
And we think that these probably began in Europe, the Middle East, and East Asia, or maybe it started in East Asia. I did hear that there was a suggestion that the very first pets likely started in Siberia.
Oh.
That was one hypothesis. So, yeah.
Interesting. That's kind of where the hypothesis is, like where it started and all that. But like, let's go ahead and go over some timelines that we know for sure, and we can go back and pin down some dates. So the first thing is that dogs and cats were buried with humans around 12,000 years ago. So that's the thing. Hopefully they weren't buried alive, but knowing human history, they probably were.
At least sometimes they probably were, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. And dogs actually got special burials around 8,000 years ago. The idea of burial and ceremony and all that, we did a whole episode on that too, I believe. So those rituals around that were pretty interesting, but dogs actually got special burials around 8,000 years ago, which I thought was kind of fascinating.
So that does kind of speak to what was the relationship of that dog to the people that was being buried with the dog. Was this like a conquered the beast and so bury it with me to show what I've done? Was it we were companions, so bury us together? Was it like we just like throwing animals in graves with people, sort of thing? We don't really know necessarily what their motives were.
Sure.
But we do know that there were a lot of motives, and one of them included sacrifice. We'll talk more about others, but animals were a part of certain sacrifices and other rituals and that sort of thing. So as an example, and not to throw China under the bus, but dogs in China were sacrificed as a means to ward off evil and sometimes as a means to bring calm weather. Mm-hmm. Other cultures, even to this day, actually consume dogs as a regular part of their diet. So it's, again, people feel differently about their animals in different parts of the world. Yeah. And some of them are not seen necessarily as companions. But anyway, so one way that they existed was as part of rituals and sacrifice.
Yeah, and now in other spaces where maybe the pets were beloved or there were bonds, for example, dogs were buried in Catalonia, which is a part of Spain. They were buried with humans, often sharing the same diet and buried close to or often touching the human. So it might have been a shared grave, or it was close enough that it was part of the ritual that went along with the burial ceremony.
Yes. Another reason might have been that they felt that there was a connection between the animals and the gods. A commonly used example of this is with Egypt. There was obviously some overlap with other cultures and civilizations did a version of this as well. One way that we know this, besides the fact that they were actually decent record keeping, was that there'd be mummified pets. And they basically mummified them through the same process and materials as they would with humans, and for the same reasons, to preserve and respect them, to try and shepherd them to the afterlife, that sort of thing. And you can see our episode on mummies that we have done if you'd like a breakdown of that.
All the spooky stuff.
That's right.
Now, what's really interesting, just to kind of give an idea of different animals that were considered pets at this time and some of the overlap and how they were related to the gods. First, there were cats, which were said to be an incarnation of Bastet, the goddess of music and the protector of women. There were bulls, which was the incarnation of Osiris, the god of embalming and cemeteries. And there were hawks, which was related to Horus, the god of light, or ibises, which was related to the god of wisdom and learning named Thoth, or Thoth, maybe.
Yeah, that name reminds me of like a H.P. Lovecraft type gog or monster, whatever.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Like it's one of the old ones.
Yeah,
but super interesting. If you ever get a chance to study Egyptian mythology, super fascinating stuff. Like really, really cool polytheistic types of beliefs.
Yeah, for sure. The Romans kept toy dogs around 2,000 years ago or so. Unclear if there was supposed to be any utility from this. There was black rats that were a major pest, so it's possible that the relation of dogs to humans involved a sort of, I'll feed you and you kill the rats type thing. Not totally sure.
Yeah, interesting, though, that they would skip cats for that.
I know, right? That it is kind of surprising.
Just knowing the direct line, dogs hate cats, cats hate rats. That's how it's supposed to go. That's the science. We know the science.
That's the stereotype for sure. Well, it's actually funny too. And speaking of cats, cats were domesticated around 7,500 years ago, BCE, possibly occurring when humans and cats both lived in those rat-infested areas. And I saw some hypotheses suggesting that as people started to engage in agriculture and they would then store their food, rats would get into their food stores, particularly grains and that sort of thing. And so they would get cats because cats would not eat the grains, but would 100% eat the rats.
Yeah.
And the other thing about cats, and the reason that it is, again, kind of surprising they would not have been the animal of choice for this in Rome, is the efficiency efficiency of cats as killers actually is among the highest of all predators in the world. They are they are basically built to kill other smaller animals, and that is their reason to exist. They are extremely good at it.
So yeah, their eyesight, their claws, their teeth, all of that stuff. Like, all you got to do is just read Animorphs, and they talk about it. And they talk about how cats are just like incredible. Yeah, back to Animorphs, we're back. But they talk about like even big cats. Like, big cats are just incredibly muscular, incredibly powerful. A swipe from a tiger would just literally knock your head off your shoulders. Like, it would just clean off your shoulders. So they're powerful creatures. Lots of respect to cats. I've never owned one. Don't want to own one because also I've learned that cats just think that we're bigger, dumber cats. So that's a thing. So cats are just too snooty for me, but they're interesting creatures.
I love cats. I only have cats as a pet. We didn't actually talk about I didn't talk about my pets at the beginning of this, but
I didn't ask you. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
How rude of me.
No, it's all right. I've had dogs, I've had cats, and people say like cat person or dog person. I'm like, I like animals. Like, I don't have any dogs right now, but I wouldn't be opposed to having a dog in the future. I just currently have cats, and but I very much love cats. I love that they're generally quiet and self-sufficient, and so I could like leave them and they can just take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. But I'm also really impressed by them. Like, watching them do their hunting thing is really something. It is impressive.
Yeah, for sure.
I was gonna say they should have modeled the Predator after a cat, but the Predator is really cool looking, so it's good. But
yeah, Predator's pretty cool too.
Yeah, the cats and Predator overlap in a lot of ways, except the cats don't generally just tear the spine out of a creature. They like to eat them.
No, I think the biggest overlap, I guess where the Venn diagram overlaps the most, is their penchant for lasers.
Right? Yes, that is true. They both love lasers. that is such a good catch, Shane. I'm glad I have you here to catch me when I miss the obvious ones like that.
Listen, it's the little things. It's the useless knowledge. I couldn't tell you what a lag schedule is in behavior analysis, but I could tell you for sure that the Predator and cats both like lasers. That's a thing that I know for sure.
That's very funny.
So, do you want to take a second to talk about, because we've been talking about pets, do we want to take a second to talk about what domestication means?
I think we should, yeah.
So, domestication is the process of adapting wild plants and animals for human use. And essentially what this means is that not all domestic animals are pets, like chicken, pigs, and cows, but not all tame animals are domestic, like elephants. So you can tame wild animals, but you can also have domestic animals that are not pets, and kind of going back to farm animals and maybe livestock and stuff like that.
And it's important to note, like, it might be a little confusing to try and distinguish, like, why then is that considered domesticated but not a pet? Why is that considered a pet but not domesticated? That's sort of like, what is domestication? How do you sort of draw those lines? And I think the thing to acknowledge there is going to be a variety, and it depends on the definition and also considering the timeline. And a good example of this is thinking about horses. There are a lot of wild horses that are out there, and in some places horses have been domesticated and in other places they haven't, and so they kind of live in both spaces. Like, sometimes they are domesticated animals that are not pets, sometimes they are pets that are tame and that sort of thing, and there are often plenty of them that are completely wild and they are not pets and they're not domesticated. So kind of an interesting thing where it depends on how you're defining it, how you're using it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for the audience, the way that I would outline it would be that you've got wild animals, which are not tame, not domesticated, or are kind of like, they don't really have like human use. But the animals that do have human use, but maybe are not, they're treated as like maybe a product. Yeah. For example, like I feel like chickens, pigs, and stuff like that are on a farm, they're not really treated as pets where they're maybe indoor animals, they live inside or whatever it might be. They're treated more like they're a part of a product in a larger kind of capacity, right? Like as part of a production capacity. And then pets are not linked into that. Like, you're not going to put your dog on a conveyor belt and send it to slaughterhouse. I mean, maybe, at least I'm not, but there are places that would do that. And so that's kind of the way that, like, I think those are like the blurry lines. The way that I understand all that is like a domesticated animal is not necessarily a pet, but it's also not a wild animal.
That makes sense. I get that. All right, let's talk a little bit more about these timelines here. We have ancient civilizations, and as far as we can tell, they probably used pets for assisting in things like hunting. pets have a lot of certain animals have advantages in their ability to provide for hunting, specifically dogs, but obviously they could have used other things. Pets would be useful for guarding and then also for helping to herd other domesticated animals and that sort of thing. And I also think, again, guarding, you could probably see a lot of different pets. And it occurs to me, thinking about how often in movies, sci-fi, fantasy, and just regular movies, how often you have the motif of some kind of guard animal or other guard-like thing that is maybe animal shaped in some capacity. Yeah. So I think that is definitely continued as well. And there's even a Paleolithic tomb in northern Israel that uncovered a burial site where a human had their hand placed on a dog's shoulder. Now, I'm unclear if this is like a skeleton of a human on the shoulder of a skeleton of a dog, or if it was like carved into the tomb that it had this image, and how exactly to interpret that. But it was a thing that happened. So interpret it as you will, I guess.
Yeah. And you can see this too in a lot of like artwork and architecture too. I mean, one of the things that you'll see are like shishi dogs or fu dogs in Japanese tattoo culture. And a lot of those dogs are like dragon lion dogs, and they are animal shaped and they look mean as hell. And there are many statues in the front of like a lot of like kingdoms, like in buildings, like in an emperor's building, like at the gates of a kingdom.
Yeah. Good point.
So that imagery is used as like a guardian or a protection in a lot of different spaces too.
Right.
So in the Middle Ages, animals were popular among the aristocracy and the clergy. They would include pets in maybe in different places like that. And I could see the aristocracy like having like pets and small birds or, stuff like that kind of put away in like gilded cages and whatnot.
Now, historically in Christianity, there have been instances and I guess waves, if you will, where in the religious preachings were opposed to pets because of their association with other pagan worship.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly. Even though so many other things have been co-opted from other pagan worship into Christianity, apparently they drew the line at pets.
That was the thing.
And Patrick points out, he said, I wonder why I've been feeling more pagan-y lately. At least now I have an explanation. I like that one. That was a good one. I feel like I couldn't set it up myself.
Yeah. I mean, Christmas trees, totally cool. But right. Pets, nope, can't do that.
Exactly.
So in the 16th and 17th centuries, during the witch trials that were going on, which is, that's a whole thing that we'll have to really spend some time unpacking and kind of talk about the mass hysteria that went along with that. Possession of animals was proof of involvement in witchcraft and Satan.
Yeah. I think we did an episode on witches for one of our Halloween episodes that talked about...
Yes, we did.
A little bit the Inquisitors, yeah, and that sort of thing.
Yes, we did. You're right. Back to Halloween episodes. Apparently, pets have led us back to all of our Halloween episodes.
That's true.
We've talked about mummies, vampires, witches, burials. That's a full year's worth of Halloween episodes.
Yeah, nailed it. So go check out our Halloween episodes, because apparently there's a lot of overlap with pets.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can see then why Christianity would be opposed to pets if you had the examples of the like witches and warlocks having familiars, and the familiars were animals, which was just basically people who cared for animals. And they're like, you can't have animals, you can't have nice things, because having nice things is bad, because we're Christian.
Yeah. It means that you're in a pact with Satan.
Yep. That has been a thing that has been an orientation at various points in history. All right, so we've been talking about, again, some more of this history with respect to pets, and it's, I think, getting into the sort of meat of this, if you will. Why do we have pets? Well, I'm not going to ask your permission for this. I'm just going to make you listen to some ads, because I gots to. Okay, so we have all these examples of people liking pets for they were companions, they had utility, they helped work alongside humans and helped humans do human things and that sort of thing. But most of that stuff is gone. If you think about it, we are now in a time where our social lives, I mean, there are just so many people in the world, there are a lot more people now than there were even a few hundred years ago. I mean, exponentially more. I've even heard that I've heard a statistic that there are more people alive today than have died throughout all of human history. If that puts into perspective how many people there are on the planet. And I've not fact checked that. So I apologize if that's wrong, but that's like, there's just a lot of people in the world. So anyway, We have the internet, we've got phones, it's very easy to connect with people. So they don't necessarily need to fill a social niche like they used to. We also have all kinds of things like medicine and therapy and stuff for supporting with mental health needs. So if they serve that role, we've got other ways to get access to that are arguably more effective, more efficient. We'll get to that part in a moment. And there was also like they served us, they were guardians, they helped serve roles in terms of hunting, and like the technology we have for hunting now it basically made hunting a joke. It's like, you get out your iPad and the satellite laser finds your prey and then a AI drone goes and kills it. I don't hunt, but
yeah,
the technology's gotten it ridiculous, and we've got like security cameras and motion sensors and stuff that can guard a house. So like we don't actually need any of the services that these animals would provide most of the times, yet we still have a lot of them. And that means that there was something else about that relationship that we've kept pets around. So let's talk about some reasons that people still have pets.
A big one is managing loneliness. A lot of people don't like to be alone. Maybe they're living in a big quiet house. Maybe they have a big space, whatever it might be. Having a pet gives somebody companionship. It gives consistent interactions with somebody, which we'll talk about later. And those positive interactions are often greater than the negative ones. It's very rare that you're going to have a lot of negative interactions with a pet that you care for and that you have in that space. So a lot of it's a really good, positive interactions with this thing that just unconditionally loves you. Unless it's a cat, then it'll probably scratch you.
And we're going to unpack a whole bunch of these things that we're about to talk about as well with some of the research that's been done on some of these. But these are sort of what's been reported. Another one is reducing stress. There's an idea, hypothesis, if you will, that interacting with pets results in the release of oxytocin, or if you're really lucky, Oxycontin. That is something you get through just the normal interactions, petting your pet, like compassionate, affectionate. You also get oxytocin during sex. It's considered the love hormone. Also, potentially, I've heard that during massage. And there's also serotonin and dopamine released through playing with animals. Those are also these neurotransmitters that have all these other effects that make us feel good. Serotonin potentially from the exercise, dopamine kind of from the fun stuff. Often when you think about dopamine hits, the people often think of hedonistic things. They're like fun stuff, drug use, shopping, sex.
The fun stuff.
Yeah, the fun stuff. I ran out. Yeah, that's the whole list.
Playing video games.
That was the exhaustive list of fun things. Anyway, point being, when we do these things, again, just the point being that our biology rewards us with these hormones and neurotransmitters that make us feel good. And so we do more of those things.
Yep, absolutely. Good old neurochemicals. Having a pet is supposed to also improve mental health. And usually what that means is there's some comfort, support, there's a consistent schedule, so there's a little bit of structure, unconditional love, which, if somebody who is struggling with acceptance, if you have a pet that accepts you all the time, then that's there's a comfort in that.
Sure. There's an important one here that I think gets at I always love those myth-busting things where it's like, the reason that this worked is because of this other thing about it. And I actually heard this phrase really well in a podcast recently where they said, what works about it is not what makes it unique, and what's unique about it is not what makes it work, is the way that it was phrased, which I really liked. And I feel like that's kind of something that can happen with some of these pet things. And one of them is that having a pet often just it creates opportunities for more social interactions. The people who go to the dog park and will see other people there. They go to the vet where they see other people there. They are out on walks with their pets. They are at pet stores with their pets. They just socialize. And when they do, it gives them something to talk about. It gives them an immediately relatable thing that's like, oh, look at your dog. I love dogs. What's your dog's name? How old are they? All that sort of stuff. And outdoor events is another place where you might have these experiences. It just creates an opportunity for socialization. So even if the animal itself isn't necessarily providing that social interaction, which it can for some people and a lot of situations, but it can also create a context where there's more opportunities for it in your normal day-to-day life.
Yeah, my friend Kate loves animals and ends up meeting the most interesting people through her pets. Like she's got a couple cats and she's got a couple ferrets. And the ferrets are always like a really interesting talking point. People are like, what do you do with these? And they're like, yeah, they're just weird animals. So ferrets are very strange if you ever have a chance to spend time with them.
I have a little bit, and they are strange. This is a fact.
They're weird little noodle animals that are not snakes.
ferrets are just furry-legged snakes.
Now, another one is that pets supposedly improve longevity of life through stress reduction and better mental health. So those things tend to contribute to better quality of life and also better physical shape of owners, because the owners have to walk the animal. They have to actually be active to take care of the animal for the most part. So there is some level of just kind of physical interaction that allows for better physical shape of the owners.
People still do rely on their pets to some extent as some kind of household protection. Cats have not changed in their ability to catch mice and insects and that sort of thing. We had a little bit of a mouse infestation at our house a while back. And even though I did not directly send my cats after to get the mice, they found them. They found, like, I didn't even know they were there. And all of a sudden there were mouse bodies piling up. They also like to catch insects and bugs and that sort of thing. So they're good for that. Dogs, obviously people rely on them for some home invasion stuff. They will, when someone knocks or comes by or even comes too close to the house, they start sounding the alarm. So they're very, very good at motion detection, and they'll smell things, obviously coming through. So people still rely on that quite a bit. Unless you have a lab, they'll just lick whoever's coming through the door.
Yeah, that's both my dogs, and they're not labs. They're just like, the minute they'll bark, and then in the minute that person gets close, they're like, okay, you're going to pet me. That's great.
Yeah, and it is obviously, that was just a joke too, because we've even talked about the fact that the science actually shows it's pretty clear that dog personality and dog breed seem to be unrelated to the point of being just wrong.
Yeah.
Like when you do studies, every dog is pretty much, they have their own personality. They're not consistent, and there's like more overlap across breeds than there are within like a breed. So just how they're raised, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the last thing that gets brought up a lot about pets is the idea of the impact on a child's development. And a lot of that is that having an animal around that requires somebody to care for it will allow the family to give the child some responsibilities, like feeding, walking, bathing the dogs, taking care of them. And there is like a level of responsibility that helps kind of, pay attention to caring for somebody else, and probably also helps build that empathy piece with young learners too, that maybe struggle with that. So there is that as well as part of the child's development.
Yeah, and as a reminder, we're about to get to the science section of this. So some of those things will be supported by the evidence. Some of them will be a little bit tweaked by the evidence, like yes, but, or here's maybe a caveat to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so, we want to know then, what does the science have to say? What the science has to say is wait for these ads and then come back and find out.
So we're back in science. So we're going to talk about science and kind of maybe undo some of those myths that come along with owning pets, and actually confirm some of the things too.
Yes.
And the first thing is really looking at, there are several variables that are related to or responsible for the interactions that we have with pets. There is the Biophilia Hypothesis, which was produced by Wilson in 1984, and basically says there's an innate complex of rules that trigger emotional responses to animals that are often shaped by culture. And so humans are attentive to other forms of life generally, and that makes sense, possibly due to shared perceptual features like eyes and mouths, which is probably why we typically relate to animals that have eyes and mouths. That's most of our pets.
Yeah.
And possible natural selection, right? So we basically select a trait that allowed us to care for infants, and that continued and generalized across a species.
And the Biophilia Hypothesis, we've mentioned it, I think, at some other point on the show, but it is one that at some point we're going to do a deep dive on what that is, because I think there's some important sort of skeptical caveats to apply to it, but it's an interesting hypothesis to explore nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another variable here is reciprocal attachment, where humans are seen as caretakers for animals. Animals actually may serve as the reciprocal by providing close proximity, security, and showing distress through separation and sort of functioning as a safe space. So because, presumably, they're dependent on us, there's some value and sort of stake we have in their overall well-being. And it's not unlike caring for a child or someone else who's dependent on you, that because I think, we are such social animals, there is a lot of natural reward that comes from, I think, effectively caring for and being around others of basically others sort of stop at that point, but animals can fit in that space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another part of kind of having an animal or pet is animal-assisted interventions or animal-assisted therapies. So essentially what this means is that animals are incorporated as a supplemental part of a treatment process. And so you might have different animals like dolphins, horses, dogs, guinea pigs, birds, etc., and they serve as part of an intervention for a human need, which could include trauma, hospice, addiction rehab, physical therapy, dental procedures, etc. So like there's basically an animal is inserted into a treatment setting or a treatment context as part of an intervention package.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to add is when we say part of a treatment process, we mean with respect to some kind of medical situation, although that can include mental health as a type of therapy, but also used sometimes for physical therapy. And some of the benefits that are espoused by the animal assisted therapy is communication topics, higher level of serotonin and oxytocin, reduced pain levels during surgery, that sort of thing. And so the important thing to understand about this, though, is like there's a lot of caveats here. Mm-hmm. One is the evidence and anecdotal reports are presented, but the data, there's very little actual causal data showing this. You have some correlations, but very little that actually suggests that it's directly effective.
So that leads us to the question of, do dogs have an impact on mental health or factors associated with dogs ownership or dog ownership? Does it have any benefits? Well, in 2015, a study was conducted where 21% of children without a dog tested positive for clinical anxiety, where 12% with a dog tested having clinical anxiety. So there is a difference that is related to owning a dog, but it doesn't necessarily say that the dog is the intervention or the dog is the cause or any of those things. It's simply, hey, kids without dogs, more of them seem to have anxiety than kids with dogs. And that's really all it says. It doesn't say anything else about causes or anything like that.
You know, and we'll get to this later, talking about the families that are able to have dogs might have access to things that make it so they're overall at less risk anyway. Mm-hmm. And so it's the fact that they're able to have a dog and not the dog itself.
Right.
The factors that make that possible may contribute to overall better well-being.
It may be more an issue that the person has, like there's less resource scarcity.
Exactly.
In that circumstance.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But the other consideration is thinking about how we're using animals in this situation before, during, and after therapy, and sort of how they're reacting to this. So before, there should be a behavioral evaluation to identify the animal's response to various stimulus and presentations, such as commands, how they react to strangers or other animals, how they react to forceful hugging and that sort of thing, because just tolerating it is actually insufficient for them. They should specifically enjoy it, mm-hmm. that kind of contact and those kind of situations. And so animals chosen really should meet the specific goals of therapy, not just because they're there. And so that could be a matter of training. It could be a matter of the animal itself and what makes sense biologically for them. Maybe for you, a snake is the most, cuddly pet you can have for therapy.
Yeah.
It depends on what you need it for.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, during therapy, we might look at the effect of therapy on the animal itself. So we might see changes in cortisol levels or signs of stress. And studies have shown mixed results, specifically related to cortisol levels, where cortisol spikes might be due to positive or distress arousal. So there's it's still kind of up in the air about whether an animal is effective during therapy.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, you have after the therapeutic relationship, they sort of talk about this as a retirement, if you will. People like to view this optimistically as a reward for a lifetime of work. But for animals, the animal may be ready to retire, but the client or handler is not, or it may only occur if and when the animal has some kind of health issue that sort of forces them into, so they're not really effective for that role anymore.
Yeah.
So just as a consideration for that situation, I guess.
So it's probably worth looking at what other contemporary psychologists say about this particular thing. And one of the things they say is that we get unconditional love from pets, and those social connections, like people we talk to or people talk to other people with pets, like we kind of mentioned before, and that social engagement, like you have a pet as a friend, is actually maybe pretty helpful for people, right? So if people are experiencing that loneliness of human interactions, at the least they have a pet that will love them no matter what, because, we feed them and stuff.
Yeah, because they're dependent on us and they know nothing else.
Yeah.
In general, looking at the totality of research, I looked at a lot of meta-analyses. And in general, it looks like people experience benefits from owning pets, except when the researchers controlled for home ownership, the wealth of the owner, the health of the owner, and the race of the owners. So essentially, what you could kind of boil this down to, and they didn't say this part, I sort of put this in my own words, is the idea that pets are a luxury item and they're a lot of responsibility. And so where you start to see that pets are no longer helpful is the fact that owners may have trouble finding affordable housing that allows for pets or might limit their options. Mm-hmm. Owners may feel guilt about the behavior of their pet. If they work a lot and their pets have a lot of pent up energy, they aren't there to necessarily take care of them or to train them. They might not be able to afford paying for training them or know how to. And then their behavior is not good. And of course, owners may feel, with respect to that, owners may feel guilt about being unable to take good care of their pet. They might feel angry about the fact that others blame them for this or that they want to take good care of their pet, but they feel like they can't. And so that makes them angry. And so there are situations where having the pet actually becomes more stressful because of their situation.
A lot of times what might happen is, and what you can kind of point towards, is that feeling good about having a pet or seeing the benefits of having a pet may actually be more related to the privilege of being able to own a pet.
Right.
I think a really important part of this is that when you have more resources and expendable resources, then you can spend them on taking care of another creature. But when you don't have as many expendable resources, then that becomes a stressor in itself. And then when there is something else that's taking up expendable resources, then that thing becomes the target of stress and anger and anxiety and all the things that are related to poverty and low socioeconomic status.
Exactly right. Yeah, they kind of exacerbate the existing problems.
Yeah.
Now, with all that being said, there are some benefits here, as we sort of described. There was an analysis of 22 studies that showed that there was a benefit for kids, specifically in them having lower risk of anxiety, having higher self-esteem, and also less risk for other mental health problems. And then there is some evidence, although this really isn't confirmed, but some evidence suggests that it may improve empathy, as we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. And then there is also the fact that during lockdown and the pandemic from COVID-19, those people who were completely alone at least reported feeling less lonely if they had pets because they had pets.
Right. And then some people have actually reported decreased anxiety and depression and improved quality of life because they own pets. So that is kind of a side effect. And now that's self-report, and we know self-report is not always the most accurate way to report out on things like that. But, you know, when you're measuring something like anxiety or depression, due to the nature of those things, you have to kind of get a self-report on that.
Yeah. A 2018 meta-analysis of 28 articles on pet therapy looked at the effect of pet therapy on stress responses, both physiological and like self-reported emotional stress responses. And so the physical stress responses they looked at were heart rate and blood pressure. And they found that there was an actual statistically significant difference across those 28 articles in the heart rates that were reported, showing lower heart rates for people who were interacting with pets. Mm-hmm. And there also was a statistically significant report of improved subjective experience of stress and anxiety, meaning people reporting feeling less stressed and less anxious. There was, however, no effect for blood pressure. So although some people reported this, when they looked at the totality of evidence available, it suggested that it does not help with blood pressure, which makes total sense to me. Like that's not going to be a thing that's necessarily directly affected by that, because it's a medical issue and impacted by so many biological things.
Right, absolutely. Now, Lang et al. In 2019 actually did a study where they looked at pet robot interventions, and I want to say that again, pet robot interventions.
Robot pets.
So, robot pets.
We're the Jetsons.
We're here. We've arrived. And this is specifically for an intervention for people with dementia. And they kind of broke this down. What they did is they did a meta-analysis of 8 articles, and they found statistically significant decreases in symptoms of elderly patients with dementia, especially agitation and depression. But there was no effect on cognitive function or quality of life. So basically, the robot pets made those folks less depressed, less irritable, but didn't really have an impact on anything else.
Right. Which, again, it makes perfect sense. You're dealing with a deterioration of someone's brain. having a pet around, there's no reason to believe that would have any impact on that. But the fact that there was some benefit, again, like that's what I think we want to look at, is that these are not panaceas. They're not guarantees. They will be probably helpful for some people in a lot of these situations, as long as they do not create added stress.
Right.
It's just things to think about, right? So interestingly, I was actually directed to the CDC has weighed in on this a little bit.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know. They do suggest that pets can teach children, quote, compassion and responsibility. They did not cite any evidence for this. So I was trying to find like what makes you say that, but they say it and they're an authority figure. So I guess they're their own reference there.
They're their own thing.
They're their own thing. But they do have some sort of caveats. One specifically is they recommend having children wash their hands after interacting with a pet. In addition, they had a lot of caveats for children under 5 that they should be supervised while interacting with pets, and to specifically instruct children, whether or not they're 5, but definitely 5 or under, and to monitor them so they do not try and put their mouths on their pets' mouths. So no swapping of the saliva, because kids might try and kiss an animal right in the mouth, not really understanding. They got tons and tons of crazy bacteria in there and very, very sharp teeth. It is just a bad situation. Keep your face away from their face.
I wonder if it's more for protection for the pets, because isn't like the human bite is way worse as far as bacteria goes than like a dog bite.
You might make a good point.
I wonder if it's the CDC has come out, like they've stopped giving a shit about humans, and they're just like, you should watch out for your pets. Like, don't let your kids ruin your pets and make your pets sick with those gross sticky mouths.
Exactly.
These kids are gross. I do like the idea of the CDC standing up for pets and not humans at this point in time.
Right.
That's a nice thought. So now the thing that I was kind of thinking about with this is that humans likely get some reward. I mean, we've kind of talked about that, and this makes sense from just kind of an armchair behavioral standpoint at this point.
Right.
You know, the feeling of feathers, scales, or fur, maybe a preferred tactile feeling for some people.
Yeah.
The feeling of pressure, physical touch may also be preferred by some people, especially those who seek cuddles. You know, like you sit on a couch and your dog sits right up next to you. Like, that's a good feeling. Like, there's some reward that comes out of that. We talked about the physical touch earlier. And the sense of caring for something else, or the accomplishment, the sense of achievement that comes from keeping something alive, may also be a reward, right? So you think about how interesting that is when it's like, oh, I kept this thing alive. This is an accomplishment. I can do this.
Right.
You know, I may fail at every other part of my life, but this is a thing that I thrive at. And that's kind of a cool reward system when you think about it.
Every other part of your life. Man, it's tough.
Every other part's falling apart, but I can keep this dog alive, and that is something.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's pretty good. Now, from a language standpoint, having a pet provides a built-in audience for a person, even though there's not necessarily reciprocal communication. For some, that's probably ideal. You know, I feel like I talk a lot.
Yeah.
It appears that animals following comments may simulate the idea of receptive language. So you talk to an animal and then they react in some way. And because the reaction is ambiguous and doesn't necessarily like it have a definitive, unless it's like actively running away, right? You can kind of impose whatever interpretation onto the reaction you want. And so again, it does simulate the idea of an audience because they're responding in a way that looks like they're responding to something specific you may have said.
Yeah.
And so basically they're a listener that rewards you for talking by being a reactive listener.
Yeah.
They can kind of serve that role, which does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've more or less said most of what we have to say. There are some interesting tidbits that I think are not only interesting, but actually straight up fascinating. And we'll get to a point where it's kind of also a little bit sad things to know.
So while this ad plays, go pet your pet. Or I guess if you have kids, you can pet them too. I don't know. But or if you want to take a quick music break, go listen to NoFX Heavy Petting Zoo.
There you go. All right, so let's close this out with sort of going through our interesting tidbits, and then we'll get to our recommendations as well. Some quick stats about pet owners. 14% are Gen Z, 32% are millennials, so that's the majority. That's the biggest one. That's right, that's us.
We rule. Millennials rule.
24% are Gen X, 27% are baby boomer, and 3% are builder.
I don't know what the builder generation is. Isn't that the greatest generation?
Sure. Maybe builder is like the early 1900s.
Yeah, I don't know. 75% of pet owners celebrate their dog's birthday. So we try to, but I don't know exactly when my dog's birthdays are. But we're like, hey, we've had you for a couple years. We celebrate our bringing them home.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the animals themselves seem to care very little about the ceremony. They never say thank you.
Pretty indifferent.
Yeah, they just...
Yeah, kind of rude, really.
They won't ever give me a gift list. I just have to figure it out. There are some very unusual pets that people have had. And some of these are maybe things that you don't think are that weird. Like hedgehogs and hermit crabs are things I know a lot of people have. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure if you've heard of people who will keep cockroaches as pets, a fennec fox as a pet.
Interesting.
Millipedes as pets, scorpions.
I knew someone who had a millipede.
I've heard of praying mantises, which I've heard the plural is mantids, maybe.
Oh, I don't like that.
As pets, so there's that.
Cool. Now, pet cemeteries are currently being reviewed in Yelp, so you can go into Yelp and look up pet cemeteries and actually see the reviews. There are 7 near Patrick, where he lives, and one has a 1-star rating.
Yikes.
I kind of want to read those reviews. I want to know why. Arguably, and I think that there's consensus here at the Why We Do What We Do crew, that the cemetery and pet cemetery should at least get a 2-star review because it's effective in what it does, but it's scary.
It is. Yeah, it does do exactly what it says it's going to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, if you're ranking it based on does it do what it says, what it sets out to do, then yes, it does. Is it useful? No.
All right, let's talk about some pets with respect to movie ranking. I think Patrick made this up, but I'm going to go ahead and go with it here. So if he's ranking these from top to bottom, we have Baxter in Anchorman.
Yeah, poor Baxter.
Hooch from Turner and Hooch. Jones from Aliens. And Flounder from The Little Mermaid.
I think I'd put Flounder up higher. I like Flounder.
So? Okay.
I got a soft spot for an anxious fish.
That's fair. I do like Baxter as being pretty high on the list, though. I'm good with that.
Yeah. I don't know. He didn't put Blue from Jurassic World on there.
Oh, yeah. Was that a pet? Because maybe that was like a tame animal that was not domesticated, so it didn't meet the definition of a pet.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, it was domesticated. Like, it was not, because Blue wasn't a wild animal. Okay, all right. That's fair.
Philosophy.
I know. As far as fictional animals go, fictional pets, you've got Garfield, Gary from SpongeBob. You've got Gizmo, which is also very dangerous. I have a question about Gizmo. When they say after midnight, does the midnight change based on what time zone he's in?
I think it does, yeah.
Like, is he a time zone sensitive creature, which is an interesting thing? So, like, basically he's evolved to respond to hypothetical constructs and imaginary borders?
I think what it has to do is the time between. So what it has built in is that he has the biological clock that's tuned finely to the Earth's 24-hour period. And that once the clock sets, or once the sun sets and then rises again, it's also finely tuned to the cycles of the seasons. So it always responds exactly to how long it's been since the sun set to when it's about to rise relative to the season. So that's, okay. I'm making that up completely whole cloth, not based on anything. I just decided that's how I'm going to make that. I'm going to fit that square peg into that round hole.
Honestly, I'm sold. That totally worked. And so then the other question I have is after midnight. If it's after midnight, how much because everything is after midnight. So to what degree, like how much longer after midnight? Because technically by definition, and then here's what it is that there's that John Mulaney skit where somebody's like, technically it's tomorrow. And then he like kicks the kid out of the sleepover. He's like, take your EpiPen and get out of here. And like, I know I'm being that kid right now. So basically what I'm saying is go watch Gremlins and Gremlins 2 because they're excellent movies.
Yeah, you broke it for me. Now I don't know what to do. Well, I don't know. You're right.
It's okay.
After
we'll do a shorty
all day.
We'll do a mini. Yeah, we'll do a mini on the rules of the Gremlins universe.
Ugh.
So there's also Zero from Nightmare Before Christmas. There's Mr. Ed, and there's Santa's Little Helper from Simpsons, which is arguably one of my favorites. And I like Snowball and Snowball 2 as well.
And then let's also do pets from non-human, or I guess not actual real animal type pets.
Yeah, fictional.
Yeah, fictional pets. That's right. We have Thor's goats, which I'm going to do my best to pronounce his name. Tengrisnir, which is teeth bearer, and
Tengjoster.
Tengjoster. Yeah, Tengjoster, which is teeth grinder.
I think it's Tengjoster.
Tengjoster.
It's a weird one.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also the Raven from Pose the Raven, which I don't know that that's a pet.
Yeah, that's true. I guess ravens are real.
Yeah, ravens are real, but the Raven that says nevermore, that's a little scary.
Arguably Zoidberg is a pet.
Yeah. Pennywise, horrible pet. Don't like that.
Yeah. Greedo?
Is Greedo a pet? What is happening here?
Yeah.
Godzilla, also destructive pet.
Yeah,
Not a pet.
who owns Godzilla? They're doing a terrible job.
Yeah.
Pikachu seems awfully independent to be a pet, but sure.
Yeah, pet with attitude for sure. And then Knuckles, also the same thing. I'm pretty sure Knuckles is a sentient organism. Like, isn't Knuckles like part of the Echidna tribe? Like, that's the whole anyway. So
maybe Patrick's suggesting that these become people's pets. That's probably what it is.
Yeah, I think that's what he's getting at. Which, to be fair, Thor's goats will be fine. I think that they're a renewable resource. Like, if you study, like, you can eat Thor's goats, and as long as you keep all the bones, they regenerate.
I think I've heard that. Yeah.
Knuckles would be pretty cool too. Pikachu would be great because then you could get yourself off the electric grid.
our alternative energy solution. That's fun. All right, let's end on the downeriest of downer notes.
Yeah. This is so sad. So this is Suicide Awareness Month, and we would be remiss not to report this because pets are so important to people. But in order to take care of our pets, one of the things that we have to do is we have to sometimes receive veterinary care. And unfortunately, there is a very high rate of suicidality among veterinary practitioners. As a matter of fact, in a study that was done in 2015, they found that 19% of people that responded in this study out of an N of 769, 19 reported that they seriously thought about suicidality, and 9% actually attempted it. 49% of that group that talked about thinking seriously about it were at a risk to repeat or to engage. So the risk is very real, and it's a very serious thing among those. And there's a reason for that. So, for vets, they are typically not taken care of by the public. They are bullied into giving free services. They have to put a lot of animals and euthanize a lot of animals, which is a very difficult thing, that you are the reason that somebody's family member had to be put to death. And so you typically get blamed, or that grief gets displaced when it's not really your fault. You're just rendering a service. And so there's a lot of kind of things that contribute to that rate, unfortunately.
Yeah, this whole thing called sort of compassion fatigue that occurs from dealing with all that goes into caring for people's pets, and then it just sort of, as you said, the reaction from the people that, like, they blame vets, they get angry at them, they feel like they're mad at them for charging what they charge. And I'm sure that there are people who do sort of price gouging things, right? But in general, people get into helping professions such as being doctors and vets and that sort of thing because they genuinely want to help. Like, that's, I think, the vast majority of people who end up in positions such as those. Yeah. And then when you have that job and you go in day and just keep getting verbally abused by your patients, by people who are upset because you didn't do more or couldn't do more, or had to charge for your services. Yeah, I can certainly imagine that taking a pretty heavy toll. And so I guess if there's anything to end on there, it's just be nice to the people who are out. Be nice to people, honestly.
Be nice to people. Yes,
definitely thinking about those people who are particularly vulnerable to, because they're in these high intense situations where we are trusting them with the lives of our pets, and they are doing their best to honor that with us. And so then if they can't be successful at all times, they still put themselves out there and try to help. So be nice to people.
Yeah.
And be nice to vets.
Absolutely. 100%. Be nice to people, and specifically be nice to vets. Reach out to your vet and thank them for the work that they do.
All right, we're running long. Let's get some take-home points in there, and then we'll get to our recommendations.
Yeah, so my big take-home point is that nobody knows why we have pets or where they started, but there's a whole lot of reasons why we think that happened. So that's a fun kind of thing to explore. It's like the one thing in human history that's like pretty pervasive in most cultures we don't know anything about.
That's true. I think the one thing that we can definitely say about it, because we understand that everything that we do for some kind of reason. The reason is that there's going to be some kind of reward. Either it gets us out of things that we don't like, or it gets us things that we like. And that's going to be true for pets as well. How that shows up for each individual is going to be wildly variable. But I think the circumstances essentially result in the fact that there's some kind of benefit or payoff for them. Sometimes it's as simple as I'm meeting the expectations that I have a pet because that's what people do. And sometimes it's as complex as like, this actually helps me feel better about my mental health issues type of thing. Yeah. So I think that is a part of that. Yeah. I do think if there's a take home point, there's sort of like the history has been winding. It's been interesting. Cats have been everything from gods to a tremendous annoyance to people at various points in history. And dogs are kind of similar too.
Yeah. I think my last take home point would be that pets are important to people. And so just know that, and people will treat their pets a certain way. I have a tattoo of a pet of mine, so
Nice.
people do all kinds of things for their pets. So just be nice to people's pets,
And be nice to vets.
be nice to pets, vets, and humans in general. Just be nice. Just be nice. That's the take home point. Be nice in general.
That's a good take home point. All right, I have some recommendations. Do you have a recommendation?
I too have recommendations. Recommendations.
All right, I am recommending a new-ish movie. It might not be in theaters at the time that we're recording this, but if it is, get yourself to movie theater and go watch Bullet Train. This, without going into a huge description of this, as I want to do for both sake of time and for not spoiling it, tremendous cast. I mean, just absolutely A-list across the board. Super fun, fast-paced, exciting, funny. It is gory, and there's some obviously adult language. I don't believe there's any nudity in it, which I know is a deal breaker for a lot of people. And I do not believe there's any depictions of violence towards animals. I don't think that there's any direct sexual assault type violence. It's really just people with swords and guns going at each other. So I think if you're into that sort of thing, you will find a lot of joy. I had so much fun. This movie was such a blast, and like legitimately good, like not just fun in the sense that like silly and entertaining, but fun that it was like actually a really well done movie. I really enjoyed it.
Cool. All right. Yeah, it's been on my list, so I want to make sure I get to it.
Oh, and that's so as Bullet Train was the movie. Sorry.
I also have a movie, which is interesting because normally the movies that I see in theaters, I don't get to see a lot of movies outside of like Marvel. I don't typically do that. This time I made the time to do that. And that movie is called The Woman King, starring Viola Davis.
Nice.
Woo! Let me tell you, more than 2 hours, just pure badassery. That's the only way I can describe it. And one thing that's really cool, I won't spoil it, but it's basically the story of the kingdom of Dahomey and the elite guard of women warriors that were feared among a lot of the West African communities because they were just, like I mentioned to Abraham at the beginning of the show, they primarily use like this kind of machete weapon and just total badass. Like just, it's so good. So anyway, it's a really good story. Apparently it's based on like a very real historical facts, and it takes place during a lot of the slave trade era in West Africa. So there's a lot of like really good justice for slave trade, like getting back at slave traders.
Okay.
If you like that kind of thing, then go watch it.
Cool.
So it stars Viola Davis, kind of an upstart. I've never seen her in anything. Her name is Thuso Mbedu, and she's wonderful in it. And it's got Lashana Lynch, who is, she plays Maria Rambeau from Captain Marvel. She's Captain Marvel's friend and plays Captain Marvel in Doctor Strange. And then it's also got John Boyega, who plays King Gezo in it. Nice. And he's great in it too. Literally everybody in this movie is amazing. Phenomenal cast. So go see it.
Awesome. If you'd like to tell us about a movie that you saw recently that you enjoyed, you should definitely reach out to us. If you'd like to tell us about your pet or why you think you like pets or anything that we missed in talking about pets, please reach out to us. We're happy to hear those things. We're happy to share those things with our audience. You can always reach us directly at info@wwd.podcast.com. You can find us on the social media platforms and talk to us there. Mm-hmm. And you can send us a letter if you want. If you email me, I'll send you our P.O. box. I might even just say it on here one of these days, but you can send something there. Preferably not something dangerous.
Yes.
But you can send us mail if you wanted to. You know what, Shane, you mentioned that you talked to me at the beginning of the episode about something, and what he was able to do that, and you weren't able to hear it, but we do record those things. But we record them for our Patreon group. And because they get an uncut, unedited version of each episode, as well as access to videos of us recording these episodes. And that includes a list of amazing people: Amanda, Brad, the Daily BA, Joshua, Justin, Justine, Kim, Kostia, Kelly, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, and Stephanie. Thank you all so much for your continued awesome support. You are the best. You too can join that list of people by joining us over on Patreon, where you get access to many of the benefits as those I just listed. If you don't want to support us that way, you can head over to our merch store and pick up some really good water bottle or sweater or shirt or mug or stickers or all kinds of stuff over there. So there's lots of good stuff over on our store. And if you don't want to support us financially, you can always just leave us a rating and review share us with a friend, get a tattoo of us somewhere on your body, that works as well.
Yes, please do that.
Absolutely. And then I would like to thank so much my team of people who helped make this show happen. That is Justin, Selena, Kyle, Alan, Patrick, and Jess, our recent additions to the team. Thank you so much. And of course, Shane, couldn't do it without you and recording with me.
Couldn't do it without you. It's nice to be here.
This podcast wouldn't exist without my listeners, so thank you everyone for listening. Is there anything that I missed or anything we should add before we wrap this up?
No, I think that's it.
All right, thank you all. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.